Hello and welcome back to the EMJ GOLD Podcast, brought to you by EMJ, your number one open access destination for HCPs and pharma globally. Hi Jade, welcome back. How are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you doing?
Good. Looking forward, as ever, to sharing today's episode.
Of course. Looking forward to this one. What have we got coming up today?
So today I'm very pleased to share a recent conversation I had with Mortimer Ryan, who is the Senior Global Marketing Manager at GSK for vaccines. And we spoke about a number of things, but including patient-centric pharma marketing and how pharma can use patient behaviour insights to create insight-driven campaigns.
It's a really important and interesting discussion, I imagine. But before we do get into that, shall we learn a bit more about Matt himself?
Let's do it.
So as you mentioned, Matt works at GSK, where he's been for the last 3 years, executing global strategy, multi-channel campaigns, so much more. But before that, he actually spent over 20 years in industry now in companies such as Danone and Pfizer, where he actually began his pharma career in sales.
He did, and we do touch on that in the interview. Matt has some great experience, and I think he's really keen on blending scientific curiosity with creativity, and he's really known for driving deep behavioural insights in global campaigns. So really great person to talk to on this topic. I think that's enough from us.
Shall we listen in?
Let's do it. So Matt, welcome to the podcast. It's lovely to have you on today. How's it going?
Hi Isabel, thank you so much. Yes, going really well. Thank you for the invite to this podcast. It's a real privilege to be here with you today. I'm looking forward to it. I just need to get a formality out of the way. Everything I share today will reflect my own personal views and experiences and not that of my employer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, Matt, we are very excited to have you on today. We're going to be discussing patient centricity in pharma marketing, specifically how to use insights to shape these kind of campaigns, a really interesting topic. But before we get into all of that, as we always do, I'd love to know a little bit more about you. So if you could start with telling me why you decided to choose a career in the pharmaceutical industry and when you first became interested in this area of patient centricity in pharma marketing itself.
Yeah, sure. I mean, always as a kid, I was a bit of a science buff. I remember spending hours playing with microscope and sort of chemistry sets as a kid, and I was fascinated by it. And that really, that curiosity led me towards a qualification in biomedical science, and then eventually towards the pharma industry. I started my career as a sales representative for the first 6 years, and that really gave me an experience of how healthcare professionals were making decisions about healthcare. And ultimately, it was about really, as a rep, understanding your customer and understanding what really matters to them at that moment. And that sparked something within me to really want to understand what makes people take action or not. And that led me to marketing. I did a qualification with the CIM about marketing. I was really hooked. I certainly found what I call my calling card. It was really a lovely blend of creative strategy, but also about understanding about humans and connecting with others and building trust. And I absolutely loved that part of that sort of category. So the past couple of decades, I'll talk you through. You asked me, I've been at Pfizer, I've worked at Danone, and now with GSK, and I've worked in both UK roles and global roles. And you asked me about patient centricity. That really crystallized for me in global roles, because I realized actually to create campaigns that really resonate across countries, across cultures, and across healthcare systems, we really had to start with the patient in mind and not actually the product or the brand. So really understanding about the patients, their beliefs, their barriers, their emotional drivers is is where I say it actually starts. That's the foundation of marketing, patient understanding.
Mm.
So in my current role, I lead consumer activation at a global level for disease awareness campaigns in the vaccines division.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that context, Matt. You certainly seem to have found a career that, yeah, taps into those two passions of yours, the science and the human behavior. And yeah, I think the behavior element is something I want to dig into today. I definitely want to dig into how it works in different markets as well. I think we'll come to that a bit later in the conversation. So, I guess for anyone that's not working specifically with gathering insights of this kind, um, I would imagine it's no easy task, especially because I've done a bit of research into bias, and sometimes people don't even know the reason they do certain things; they just do. So, what, in your experience, is the kind of most effective way to authentically uncover these insights that ultimately help you drive campaigns that are patient centric?
It's a good question, Isabel. And for me, it's about really going beyond the surface, really digging down deep into. Um, I talked about the emotional drivers, the why
Mm.
behind the whys that people are explaining the behavior. And the most impactful way, I think, is actually when you connect the dots between quant and qual. Yes, we need the quantification to tell you about what the population is doing and what percentage of them are at a certain stage of the funnel, and the segmentation and mapping patients through the healthcare system. But actually, the breakthrough, I feel, really comes through from the qual. So it's those in-depth interviews that are really revealing what patients are thinking and what they're feeling. So that's when you really see the magic coming alive, what people truly feel, um, and what stops them from taking action. So, what I have an example in the global disease awareness campaign where we really needed to understand the full patient journey and understand what are the emotional barriers, what are the moments of doubt that
Mm.
stop someone moving forward, what causes them to really hesitate and stop them from taking action. Um, and alongside the qual in-depth interviews, I think another incredibly powerful tool is social listening. And it
Mm.
gives you an unfiltered access to how people are actually talking about their own health in their own words, in their own language. And that's actually often what traditional surveys would miss, because they would tell you what they think you want to hear. So when you actually
Mm.
see the the real language that they're using, that's quite powerful. Um, and as you said, it's not an easy task really trying to uncover those insights across multiple countries. But actually, when you do that, and you place the insights at the heart of your strategy, that's when your marketing really actually becomes meaningful, and that's when it will resonate with your patients.
Mm. I know we are going to touch on the global element later, but I suppose patterns must emerge, right? It can't be, we are all individuals, but there must be some quite consistent biases or behaviors that come up. Are there any that have particularly surprised you as you've worked in this field as to, it may not make sense that a patient may initially think this way, but the more you dig in, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice follow-up question. The What I would call those are deep human truths, because what we all fear as human beings, or what gives us joy, is universal, no matter which country that you're in.
Mm.
Um, I've got an example from that global campaign that I was talking about, where on the surface, it looked like the data was promising. Awareness levels were high across several of our markets, but uptake and engagement were relatively low. And
Mm.
initially, we focused on increasing severity perceptions of the disease. And that helped patients really understand that the condition was serious and they needed to sit up and take note. But even then, the patients still weren't actually taking action, and that disconnect was a bit puzzling for us. Um,
Mm.
so we had to go deeper and run those deep qual interviews that I described earlier across multiple countries. And there were a couple of behavioral insights that came out of that that really reframed our understanding. It was one around people had a lack of social proof. They didn't see other people like
Mm.
them suffering from the condition, so it didn't feel relevant for them. Um, and also, they didn't feel as though the condition was uh, putting them at risk. They didn't feel at personal risk, even though they were in a clinically at-risk group. They just couldn't emotionally identify it.
Mm.
Um, so these insights really changed everything for us. It shaped our creative. It shaped our storytelling. It really shaped even our media strategy about how we connected with those patients in the journey. Um, and it's we develop patient narratives, stories across diverse cultures, and represented the visible consequences of the disease. And we built in social proof so they could see people like them taking action. And the result of this is that more patients spoke to their healthcare professional, the conversations went up, and that was a measurable shift in how people perceived their own vulnerability to the disease. So the learning here for the audience that I would say is when patients see themselves reflected in your marketing story, the more likely actually to take action, because you're holding up a mirror to them, and the more likely to take notice, the more likely to act upon that.
So interesting. Yeah, really interesting examples there. In terms of, yeah, getting that engagement from patients. And I think something important to note for anyone that is working in the same field as you in this industry. I know we're focusing on patients now, but I imagine some of this translates when you're trying to communicate a certain, well, trying to influence or educate a healthcare professional, right? You know, they're people as well. They will have their own biases just as patients do.
Absolutely, the humans as well, right? So they will have their own human truths. So similarly with healthcare professional campaigns, you really need to understand that um, what's ultimately incredibly important to them at that moment in time, and make sure that you build your campaign around that. And you're for sure you're going to reach out to them, and they will listen.
Mm. So, thinking about implementation of these insights, you touched on a few examples there of how you guys were able to do that. But what would be your advice for someone that wants to do more of this work within their own team, perhaps get more buy in for the value in it?
I think the value of the insight is when you actually how you apply it, how you bring it to life in your campaign. You talk about the implementation there. So the insight really needs to be pulled through to your strategy. It needs to be pulled through to your creative, the channels that you're using. It needs to be pulled also through to the KPIs that you're measuring. So that would be my recommendation, is that each of those steps is grounded in the reality of the
Mm.
customer and that insights. So it's not just your objectives or your brand goals, as it were, that are portrayed there. So when we implemented our global campaign, I'd always check back um, when in execution mode. Are we is the strategy reflected in the insight? Does the creative speak to the emotional drivers? Do these channel assets that we've created, are they addressing the real barriers that we know of our customers? And if not, go back and rework it. And in our campaign, we designed an ecosystem right the way through the consumer journey, from TV advertising to radio to social point of care. and it all helped guide the patient through from awareness to taking action. And that would be my last point here, is actually be really mindful and careful about what you measure. I think that's quite important, because it shouldn't just be impressions or click throughs, but actually shifts in perceptions of the insights that you've gathered, perceptions about the disease, but ultimately behavior change, increases in healthcare professional um, conversations. That's what we were looking to track across our top 10 markets. And that's how insight becomes impact. So my advice is track patient activation, track behavior change, because that's the real measure when you're having an impact.
Really interesting. I know you're in a global role, so you will have had to have conducted campaigns that were not just focusing in that one market, but obviously focusing more broadly. And we've touched on how, yes, I'm sure many behaviours are consistent, but others may not be. I'd be interested to know if you had any specific examples of different markets having different attitudes that you could maybe share with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the joy of a global role, is working across these
Mm.
diverse set of markets, as you describe, each with its own cultural relevance and different healthcare system. Um, so there are two key challenges that come with that, and number one is around balancing the global consistency of the campaign with local relevance. Absolutely, because for sure a message in the US is just not going to work in Japan. So you have to, when you deploy a global campaign, have flexibility really in mind, and provide the countries with strategic guardrails in our toolkits, that but gives the local teams flexibility to adapt. And when you do that, that allows them to tailor the campaign to meet their local audience. And the second key challenge really is around regulatory variation, because of course you've got very strict markets on one side of the spectrum through to perhaps more flexible regulatory systems. So when you bring your medical, local, legal and regulatory teams on board with projects, bring them in early, understand what their needs are, and give them that broad spectrum of messaging options, from your more strict to your more flexible environments. And this actually provides the countries with an opportunity to really unlock the global campaign. It helps them move faster. They're not needing to reinvent the wheel, and it's all grounded on that global insight. So that's the two main ways I would recommend helping countries um, get a local message right.
And just going back to my what I asked at the beginning, are you able to share any examples of specific markets and where they maybe differ to each other in surprising ways?
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I touched upon US and Japan. So US is, for example, very direct. They like messages to be quite loud and bold and in your face. Whereas actually Japan is much more reserved, and they actually prefer more of an indirect message, more polite. So actually, as you can see, the one creative look and feel, the one message, just is not going to land in both of those two countries.
Mm.
Um, but actually, when you provide them with creative options that will work in both of those countries, they then actually can still move forward. Um, and it will then also be applicable to other countries that are somewhere in between
Some
that spectrum.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you also touched there on working with other departments, specifically interested in working with medical on campaigns like this. I suppose this is more for even my knowledge, but who would typically lead an insight gathering campaign? Would medical do their own one and marketing do their own one? Is it something you work on together from the outset?
It's a good question. So we have a insights team. who would
Mm.
be leading on the execution. But you're right, it's the entire cross-functional team that comes round the table, puts that brief together. Everyone's clear on what we need to uncover and what we know about the customer. Everyone actually has a slightly different perspective on the patient. Medical will come from a different angle to marketing, and we need to just come around the table and make sure that we're all clear on what we're trying to achieve. But the insights would be leading on the execution. But I think the power comes in when actually you get a full 360 view of that patient from all of the departments as you're describing.
Mm. Everyone's having their own relationship with them, I suppose, so everyone has that unique perspective to bring to the table. So, Matt, we've covered quite a lot already. I now want to take our questions back to you before I conclude. So, as you mentioned, you started your career as a sales rep. You've now found your place in marketing. But yeah, if you could go back to the start of your career and give yourself a bit of advice when you were first starting out, is there anything you'd reflect on and say with the benefit of hindsight?
Um, if there was one piece of advice I'd give my young self, it would be do fewer things, but do them brilliantly.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is because I had a tendency to say yes to everything. With my energy, I wanted to contribute, I wanted to help, I wanted to be everywhere at once. But actually, over time, you realize that by saying yes to everything, it just leads you to overstretching yourself, and you need to conserve your own energy. And actually, when you focus on your time and energy on fewer things that really matter, you'll actually get more done. You'll create work that's more meaningful, more powerful, more impactful. So my advice is don't do all of it. Do what really matters and do it brilliantly.
Mm. I love that. Pick your battles and you will succeed. Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing that and also for talking through patient behavior with me today. It's been lovely to chat to you.
That's all right. Thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Very interesting discussion. Do you have any highlights you'd like to pull out from this one, as ever?
As ever, no, of course, loads of great insights from talking with Matt. He was super interesting. I thought it was particularly valuable to hear about how implementation can work from his perspective, how to really get these insight-driven campaigns off the ground, particularly the metrics and measurement side. I think there were some really useful insights in there. So yeah, fabulous for any teams that are on the journey to doing this, I think.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. I really found it interesting to hear about the country-specific differences too. It's not just patients. Of course, we've had guests talking about this in the past when it comes to, moving to work in new countries. But at the end of the day, we are all humans. We have our similarities, but there is always going to be that cultural difference that comes into play.
A really interesting part of a global role, as I'm sure many global colleagues will agree. But I think that is all we have time for this week. A big thank you to Matt for joining me for that episode, and thank you to you for tuning in.
Do be sure to come back again next week for another great conversation. But until then, it's bye from us.
Bye.